Hello, everyone. This is Guneeta again from the 1947 Partition Archive. Today, I've got here with me Gurmeet Singh Rai, who's a heritage conservationist. And today is day 6 of our series for the 75 Days of Partition. You'll see that I'm wearing headphones today. We're having some sound issues, but hopefully it will come out just fine for all of you guys. So Gurmeet is going to talk to us a little bit about her recent work on looking at the changes in the city of Amritsar, well, over time, but we're going to focus today on the changes due to partition. So Gurmeet, I guess let's start a little bit by just summarizing the work that you did for the book and how long it took you to conduct this study and this research.
So thank you so much, Guneeta. It's wonderful to be on this platform. As far as the book is concerned, it actually captures my over 2 decades of engagement with Amritsar cultural landscape and looking at heritage. And in fact, I would say I honed my skills in the sector of heritage conservation. All my learnings I can attribute to the city of Amritsar because it was for me like a laboratory. It was a live laboratory of people, of monuments, of memories. And in fact, the biggest learning I got from the city was how just to understand how tangible and intangible heritage actually coexist, because it's so alive to the memories. And clearly, partition is one of those very, very important milestones in a memory of a people that's actually shaped people of Amritsar and the city of Amritsar in itself.
And could I ask you how you got attracted to Amritsar specifically?
It's like when I trained as a conservation teacher, who kind of mentored me was Sir Bernard Fielden, a conservation architect, who kind of described his work as a provincial architect. So, he's a grand old man, Scottish gentleman, and so I kind of that concept really resonated with me because I realized that meanwhile I was also working with the National Trust out of Delhi, and I realized that whichever place I was going to, my reactions to that particular culture used to be, conditioned from where I come from. So it was like I was trying to understand their culture through my lenses of culture, which I realized was not the right way of doing it. So to be able to hone my own skills, I decided I'm going to work in Punjab. And I'm talking about early 1990s. And at that point, there wasn't much work that conservation architects were kind of getting in the market, so to speak. So it was like we had to do a bit of activism, whatever we believed in. We had to motivate people, government officers, and, try to understand what we can do. So I proposed a project where I decided I'm going to map heritage and familiarize myself with the landscape of Punjab. So the first project I picked up was that of mapping heritage along the Grand Trunk Road, also called the Mughal period Imperial Highway that connects Agra, Delhi to Lahore, passing through Punjab. We're now talking about only East Punjab here. And that was in 95-96. And that's how I came to the city of Amritsar, because at one point midway, the Imperial Highway and the Grand Trunk Road kind of, bifurcate. And that's at Philor on the banks of River Satluj, which was the outpost of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. That was marked his eastern limit of the Sikh kingdom and the Sikh empire. And that's when I went to Amritsar and as part of the mapping. So I kind of realized that if I were to, between Harmandir Sahib, the walled city, the vibrant culture of the markets and so on. So whether it was in the domain of mapping or doing conservation of buildings or understanding the urban fabric, I realized that this was going to be my, the place where I'm going to anchor my work. And so it started in 95-96. And then I also come from Gurdaspur, which is the neighboring district.
Right,
so for me,
right.
It was like working at home, so it all kind of fell in place for me.
I was going to ask about that. And I do remember when I first met you about 10 years ago when you were still working on the Grand Trunk Road project. How is that going now? And where is that project?
When we began in 95-96, we did the first bit of mapping, and that's when I understood about the Bhakti Sufi traditions, and I looked at local heritage and what is missing there. So focus was only mapping. We were doing inventories of heritage. Then I revisited it in early around 2010-11, where I proposed to the government that we should be nominating the road as a transboundary World Heritage Site. And this is something which UNESCO really pushes forward, is transboundary nominations. For me, it was like the two Punjabs mirror each other. We still have our hearts, kind of beat on the same rhythm. And so for me, I thought this would be wonderful to have a transboundary World Heritage nomination for the Grand Trunk Road, which connects the two, Pakistan and Indian, the Indian subcontinent. We're talking about the two Punjabs or even beyond. And so at that point, then Government of India was revisiting their tentative list for World Heritage. And I try to be modest, but yet proudly say that I prepared that document, met with the Director General of ASI to say, look, we need to include this in the tentative list for World Heritage, and which he kind of understood the value. And I must give credit to that, because it's not just about a consultant saying something. It has to resonate with people on the other side of the table.
But it takes skill to get it to resonate. It takes that skill. So I think you get a lot of credit for that.
So the site, so the entire road is now on the tentative list for World Heritage, but we've
That's
still
incredible.
we still have to make the nomination dossier, and I've been trying to convince the Government of Punjab to prepare the first, because this is going to be this has to be a serial nomination. So we'll have to, so the methodology, because the whole road doesn't have the character right now. The road is a vibrant road, continues to be an important spine of India, in terms of trade, in terms of linking cities and so on. But the nomination has to be where, the physical fabric is visible and culture is palpable and so on. So it'll be a serial nomination. So we'll have to identify clusters of sites where both tangible and intangible coexist. So if we can begin with Punjab and then begin the dialogue with other, there are 5 other states pan-India that will can nominate their serial nomination sites. And then, of course, at some point have this dialogue with Pakistan as well, for them to nominate sites, They've got the most fabulous sarais and all that, which actually at one point became the forts of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, like Rohtas and, a whole lot of other fortifications. So this could be a very, very interesting, dialogue between the two countries, this road.
Definitely.
Shared culture.
Definitely. And for those of our audience members that don't know, can you give them a brief 1 or 2 sentence summary of the Grand Trunk Road, where it goes from and where it goes to and how old it is?
See, in fact, these are 3 roads which go through the same passage. So the first one is during the ancient period, we call it the Uttarapath. These connected the Buddhist sites like Taxila to Nalanda. These were these very important universities during the Buddhist period, and that's how Buddhism went from India to Central Asia. In the medieval period, it becomes the Mughal highway, which, like Akbar sets up his capital in Lahore, and then Jahangir is in Agra, and then Shah Jahan is in Delhi. But it connects, like literally, you can say Kabul to Kolkata, to Sonar, I'm forgetting, it's Bangladesh, Dhaka. So this is like a pan-Indian thing. And this is how the British come into the East India Company, travels all the way. Then from Calcutta up north, and Punjab is the last state that falls to the British Empire. And then they realign the road. 1849 is when Punjab comes under the East India Company. 1857, the Indian subcontinent comes under the Crown. And the first big project they do is fixing the Grand Trunk Road to move troops. And this is like, it's the road that saved India for the British, and this is the road. Then you have cantonments and military establishments along this entire road. So you've got the Uttarapath, then the Imperial Highway, and then becomes the Grand Trunk Road. So these are actually ancient, medieval, and colonial history, that
Right.
makes this
Absolutely
road,
fascinating. And let's talk about Amritsar. So what are some of the sort of big impacts of partition on the city of Amritsar? I'm going to leave that as a very open question. I know we could talk about that for hours, but let's hear just, some summaries.
It's actually the two things I would like to, a few things that I would like to state before I kind of talk about the impact of partition. See, like you started, interestingly, you started the topic with the Grand Trunk Road. Now, Amritsar was never on the Mughal highway. It used to, Lahore connecting Lahore connecting Sirhind and further to Delhi, touched the settlements of Philor, then Noor Mahal, Nakodar, Sultanpur Lodi, Taran Taran, and into Lahore. Amritsar was not on the road, and that's how it, you would say that the city, the founders of the city, Guru Ramdas, when he moves there, you can imagine that he moves up north from where Guru Arjan Dev was, which he was in Taran Taran. Later, Guru Arjan Dev was there. But the point that they built the sacred, the site and the city off the road is also because, you can think that on the highway, you've got trade and you've got traders moving and so on. And there's a lot of humdrum, lots of activity. So when a sacred site or a pilgrimage center gets created, it kind of goes about 22 kilometers north of that highway. Now, but it's the Brit. So during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, when 1802, when Amritsar, he starts from Lahore and then he moves into Amritsar, takes over Amritsar. He does his winter capital into Lahore and summer capital into Amritsar. Now these become like twin cities. Now they're barely, I think, about 50 kilometers apart, if not less. And people used to, come to Amritsar for their, what is 50 kilometers if you think of it as a distance? Now, at that point, it resonates with the people of the Sikh Empire between Amritsar and Lahore. So they kind of become twin cities or sister cities, or reflect, one is a political headquarters, the other is a sacred, so together it kind of works with each other. Now, when partition happens, you separate the two cities. It's such an artificial separation. And in fact, I had a little presentation, but because of our technical glitch that I couldn't, connect on my laptop.
I know. It's too bad.
I wanted to show the map of the United Punjab before the partition. And the fact, interestingly, like the 1947 archives, when you wrote to me and you mentioned that it was on 3rd of June where the decision was taken in 1947 that this is a fait accompli, that Punjab would be partitioned and Bengal would be partitioned. And what are people, the Muslim League, talking about? How much into the East Punjab they were claiming, based on a population thing, that Punjab, what part should be part of Pakistan, and what from the Indian side, maybe the Congress or whoever was petitioning that what part should come into India. Interestingly, when you see these two lines, and I would urge the audience here to actually look at that, the amount they extend to the right and to the east and to the west, in the heart of it is Amritsar district. And when you look at the district, and you see that about 45 or 47% were Muslims, about 35% were Hindus, and about 10 or 15% were Sikhs. So if you were really to look at from the community, Amritsar was 45 to 47% Muslim population. And in spite of it, with Harmandir Sahib there and so on. So we can imagine that and at one point, Amritsar was being given to India, but Gurdaspur was being given to Pakistan. And Amritsar would have stuck out like a little appendage into, with Pakistan on three sides. So, you kind of see what is happening here. And of course, what follows, the impact of partition, to understand what the psychological, sociological, political, physical impact on the fabric of the city or people it's important to look at 50 years of leading up to partition. When you read the historical narrative from the Punjabis' contribution to the British India Army, to the canal colonies that got created, and how the wealth was being generated, how the community structures were being worked out, were developing. Then you have, if you look at Jallianwala Bagh, and then the Gadar movement, and then the radicals, they call the radicals Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, Sukhdev, all these people in this particular landscape, and how people across religions, across cultural, whatever identities, were actually all together working towards independence, to freedom of India. And then partition happens, and that is what they get for 50 years is what? How many generations? At least 3 generations of people being engaged. And this is what they get as an award.
Right.
Tearing people away. So I would suggest, I believe that, Amritsar, Lahore is the epicenter if you were to look at the two Punjabs. These are the two cities which form the epicenter. And of course, the impact and the stories and the experiences are gory by all who were impacted. I mean, I look at my own family, my mother was 4 years old, and, the fact that my grandparents were in Lahore, where they owned, they were, very well placed as an aristocratic family. And they come across and they get they're still settling down, and they send a 4-year-old daughter to study in Oak Grove School in Missouri. And she gets to meet her parents only once in a year, And you can imagine what happened to these midnight children who were torn away from their parents because their parents needed to now build from scratch. So It's not about people who immediately lost their lives, and
right.
It's the repercussions of it subsequently on the development of generational. I mean, I kind of say that I don't have access, or I haven't been educated in the Punjabi language, and what I would have ideally have learned if there was continuity in the cultural tradition is because my mother was pulled away from her cultural heritage, and as a result we inherited that legacy as well. So my grandmother was a Gyani who was this learned person in Punjab's culture and heritage and religious studies, and we are so disconnected,
So what I'm getting here is you're articulating the huge cultural impacts on language and culture due to partition between Lahore and Amritsar. And can you articulate some more impacts that you have observed through your work over the last few decades?
Like if I were to now talk about, you had asked about the city of Amritsar itself. For years I used to wonder, why does Amritsar look like such an urban sprawl? I'm talking about the new Amritsar. I'm not talking about the walled city. Walled city, of course, has its own branch. If you were to look at the maps of the old city, you realize that certain areas get organized as, very structured in a very colonial kind of language. And then you realize that those are the parts where probably the Muslim population were. And there was, a lot of damage to their houses and so on. And maybe at some point they decided to bulldoze those areas and reconstruct. So you see a transformation of the urban form on the eastern edge of, the western edge of the walled city. And that's where all the colleges, Hindu College, and, lots of other colleges are, DAB and all are on that particular edge. And the house form is like model towns, which got built post-partition in several cities. And when I was talking about that, you look at the rest of the city, the new part of the city, barring the western edge or beyond the railway station, where you have the Mall Road, and you have the Gobindgarh Fort and the Ranjit Avenue and the Green Avenues and all of that, which were civil lines, and they were where the cantonments were. But the northern and the southern part of Amritsar is a vast urban form with no proper planning, with no proper infrastructure. And it then occurs to you that when people migrated in hundreds of thousands into the city, they probably just sat in this vast landscape and built their own little hutments or whatever they could put together and kind of begin their life again. As a result, the urban form of Amritsar is very, very, it's really not responsive to what the historical cultural legacy of a city of Amritsar should have been. Lahore, that way, is better because Lahore was clearly a bigger city, and it was even in the early part of the 20th century, it had some modern experiments and
more planning
center and more planning.
right.
But Amritsar faced a brunt even in terms of the urban fabric is concerned.
Well, what do you think now that we're more conscious, thanks to your efforts in part, we're more conscious of some of these issues? What is the way forward?
You know, there are lots of things we need to do. And I actually think that a lot of learnings come from what the Germans did, which is to have a reconciliation mission. And that reconciliation mission, and it must be done. It's very important because, you know, I've got relatives in Pakistan and my children adore them. And we are, thanks to social media, even if we don't get to physically meet each other, we are connected. And our narratives are lovely because we see a future together. And our story is not just a story of our family, it's a story of the country. You know, we kind of represent it in a micro way, in a very, very small way. So I do believe, and just because of that, because of what I see the future in terms of the younger generation linking with each other, because that's something which we need to build on, I do believe that there's still a case for a reconciliation mission where we need to do things like Grand Trunk Road as a collaborative transboundary World Heritage nomination. We need to look at, looking at our people-to-people contact. Not just one, of course, is continuity in our cultural practices, but the dialogue could get into much, much more serious, deeper, whether it's memorializing or whether it is, like Urvashi in our book on Amritsar, Urvashi Butalia wrote a beautiful piece, and she said, is it expecting too much that one day in Harmandir Sahib there is a prayer for the lost lives across borders in Harmandir Sahib, and would it be expecting too much that in the Jama Masjid in Lahore one day in the year there's a prayer for the lost lives?
That's a beautiful
Can we
proposition.
not continue?
Yeah.
Can't we push this idea forward? So things like this, I think, are critical, that we need to have an umbrella under which we can kind of, in a dialogue, develop or kind of support a reconciliation mission.
I've got two more things to ask you before we end this micro podcast. First of all, can you tell people the name of your book, and maybe if you happen to have your book, if you can hold it up, and where they can find it? Is it on Amazon by chance?
Yes, the book is called Amritsar, A City in Remembrance, and so it's a compilation of 11 essays, and it moves you from evolution, historical evolution of the city, to the impact of being on the trade route, to looking at Jallianwala Bagh, partition, and the cultural, the cultural narratives, basically all the writers, poets, and people in the cultural space and their contribution in the making of the city. So, so it's got essays on and leads up to the conservation needs and the kind of work that's happened in cultural heritage conservation towards the end of it, and the future. So this book is available. It's I wouldn't say it's a not a pictorial, but it's not a coffee table book, but it's like equal number of illustrations and maps and drawings, and equal amount of text as well. And the book is available on Amazon. And do have a look, and we enjoyed putting it together, and I think whoever's got a copy has actually really appreciated that it gives an insight into the city, because I don't think there's too much material on the city. I mean, of course, there are some historical older, Madanjit Kaur probably was the last one who actually put a book together on Amritsar probably in the 1980s or something, and after that we've done this. And so
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, I hope to get my copy signed when I'm in Delhi next from you. And my other last question for you is, how did your family get separated in 1947? Do you want to tell us that story? Is it something you're open to sharing?
You know, it's quite it's quite. My grandmother, my nani, had come away to Patiala. That's where she came from, and so she was there to have. I think she was expecting a baby, so she was there. And my grandfather had my mother with him in Lahore. And interestingly enough, their village is called Pratapgarh, which is south of about 40 kilometers from Lahore. And those were the times where some elections were also happening, and my grandfather actually won, as you know. I mean, as a Zilla or the local regional elections. And in fact, he'd gone to Lahore, and for the results had come out, or some sort of swearing ceremony or something was happening of the division or Zilla or something. And he was at the railway station, and he saw few trains pass with completely butchered people. And he realized that this is now serious. So he just took a train and came away from Lahore to Patiala, thinking that they will go back. This is some sort of mindlessness, that violence that is happening, and they'll get to go back. But they were not able to bring even the most precious, even if you think of it, that if they had picked up their box of jewelry or something, even that hadn't been picked up from the house. So my Nana followed to Patiala. And after that, there was no going back. There was no turning back to even revisit your house and, and do whatever. So everything was left behind. Then the only time, then one of my uncles in Pakistan, because half the family, I should have said that earlier, are Muslims in our family. These are Nakai family. And this was about 5 generations before that. There was one branch which is, follows Islam. So one of those uncles, Zahid Nakai, he started looking for my grandfather. And this was when the Asian Games were happening in India in 1982. And they came to India and they got in touch. And there was, then there has
So
been
fascinating.
no looking back. And we've been traveling to Lahore and to other parts of Pakistan post that. And they've been coming. Only in the last 4 or 5 years, we haven't been able to do it because of COVID and other political hiccups. But otherwise, our families are in touch with each other. But I went to Pakistan the first time when I was mapping monuments along the Grand Trunk Road, and I reached the border at Atari. There's a place called Rajatal, and I reached the border and I could see the Radcliffe Line, and right where the barbed wire is demarcating, dividing the two countries, there's a Kos Minar, and Kos Minar is that Mughal monument. It's like a milestone, a tall obelisk-like thing. And I said, "What the hell? Why can't I go to Lahore? We're right here." So that's when we went. I and my friend, we got our visas and went across to Lahore. So my first visit to Pakistan was in 1996, which was a continuation of my journey on mapping heritage along the Grand Trunk Road. And after that, I've been there several times.
And have you had any problems with
that's my
visas?
story.
With getting a visa to go to Lahore?
Not till the last time I went was actually about quite some time ago, because after that they've been coming. I think the last time I went was probably around 2012, 13, or even around that time. And my family's been from Pakistan. I've been visiting after that because we had some weddings this time. But we did not have a problem till then, because there were weddings, there were invitations. I did a couple of trips or representing on UNESCO platforms. So it was okay. Those 5 or 6 times that I went, we didn't particularly have any problem. But then, of course, the last, yes, how can I forget this? My family, my mother and her sisters and brother, and they all went across the Kartarpur corridor in 2019 December, just before COVID struck us. And we didn't realize that they purposely did not inform us, because it was their generation in touch with their generation across the border, and they met at Kartarpur, and that was the last time the family members have met each other. But I made a Facebook post on it as well. So anyway, that was the last time there was any physical contact between the families, and really we need to continue
Change
now
that.
that things, COVID is settled, and yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I hope that the audience gets inspired towards heritage conservation, towards at least doing, if everybody does their bit, which is even appreciation is doing our bit, going to places like Amritsar and seeing some of these sites that you've helped conserve, I think is a part of what each of us can do. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on today, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. And everyone, please check out Gurmeet's book if you can.
Thank you so much, Guneeta. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform. Yeah.
See you. Bye.
All right.